The murderer has been sentenced to life imprisonment after he was found guilty of beating a man to death at an Ipswich guest house last summer. Warren Atkinson, 41, of Norwich Road in Ipswich, appeared at Ipswich Crown Court where he was jailed for life, with a minimum term of 15 years. Atkinson had been found guilty of murder on Wednesday, November 16, following a 9-week trial. Atkinson had denied murdering 37-year-old Steven Povey on Friday, 9 July 2021, at the guest house on Norwich Road, where they both resided. Police had been called to the address by the ambulance service on the day in question at just before 4:55 p.m., reporting that a man had sustained serious injuries inside the property. Mr. Povey had been found unconscious in a kitchenette on the top floor of the building, with significant visible facial injuries. He was lying on his back on the floor with a substantially sized wooden coffee table on top of him. Mr. Povey was treated at the scene by paramedics, but, despite their best efforts, he was declared deceased at 5:35 p.m. The post-mortem examination found that Mr. Povey had multiple areas of blunt force trauma to the head and neck and sustained 62 separate sites of injury to the head and body in total. Evidence was found of bruising to the brain and a possible subarachnoid hemorrhage, consistent with traumatic injury. He also had internal bruising to the neck and a fractured larynx, which were consistent with a stamp or kick to the throat. Atkinson had been witnessed coming out of the kitchenette with blood on him, and he made a comment about Steven which the witness did not hear clearly. She then went into the kitchenette and found Mr. Povey on the floor and immediately called an ambulance, which arrived a short time later along with the police. Officers were directed to where Atkinson was within the premises and finding him bloodstained, they arrested him on suspicion of assault causing grievous bodily harm, and he was taken to Martlesham Police Investigation Centre, where he was then further arrested on suspicion of murder. He was subsequently charged and made a first appearance at court on Monday, July 2, 2021. Atkinson initially denied attacking Mr. Povey, claiming that he had fallen over a number of times as he was intoxicated and that he had tried to help him up. His clothing was seized when he was arrested and his hooded top, t-shirt, shorts and trainers were all found to have Mr. Povey's blood on them. The conclusions of the scientists who analyzed the clothing and also the distribution of blood in the kitchenette were that they suggested there had been a struggle between Atkinson and Mr. Povey, during which Mr. Povey was struck a number of times. The court heard that the injuries sustained by Mr. Povey were more consistent with blunt force assault and were not typically seen as a result of stumbles or falls. The absence of collapse-related injuries therefore did not support the initial account given by the defendant. Atkinson did later admit that he assaulted Mr. Povey, but claimed that he was acting in self-defense. However, this version of events was rejected by the court and he was found guilty by a unanimous verdict. Detective Chief Inspector Tam Burgess, the senior investigating officer, said, "All the evidence points to the fact that Steven Povey was the victim of a sustained and brutal assault. But in the starkest of terms, he was beaten to death. We know the only person who had been in that kitchenette with Steven immediately prior to sustaining his injuries was Warren Atkinson." Atkinson admits this much and was found covered in Steven's blood. Atkinson's version of events that Steven kept falling over and all he did was to try and help him up did not ring true from the outset. His later admission that he did in fact assault him but in self-defense was also without foundation. The findings of the pathologist and the forensic scientist both determined that Mr. Atkinson's injuries could have only been caused as a result of a sustained assault, one that would have far exceeded reasonable force used in self-defense. Warren Atkinson has shown a clear lack of remorse by continuing to deny that he intentionally killed Steven Povey. This was in fact the second trial Steven's family have had to endure after the first one collapsed in June, following Atkinson's significant change in defense. I can only hope that the verdict of the jury and the sentence handed down today provide Steven's family with some form of closure and they are reassured justice has been achieved for him. Our sincere condolences and heartfelt sympathies go out to the family and loved ones of Steven Povey.